So exactly 2 weeks ago, I got this birthday card from my sister in crime, which was a brilliant card, and the message almost made me cry. And I was just like, if you're watching this video, I love you, but the card, the pattern on the card, made me feel like I've just turned 40. 2 weeks ago, I was at this art gallery, and it was kind of strange because that was the first time I just kind of realized I actually really hate art galleries. A few years ago, if you dragged me to an art gallery, I would have been a guy that had done every single fact check, that had research into every single painting, that had research into like the history of these artists. But then this time around, I went into the art gallery, and the only thing that I could think about was what's downstairs at the cafeteria. So I think if you've taken any courses or any like classes in intro to psychology, you're probably familiar with the term synaptogenesis and synaptic pruning. So synaptogenesis is this process where your brain is trying to make as many connections as it can to the outside world. That's probably when you've picked up your first language, when you've learned how to play the trumpet because your mom forced you to play the trumpet. That's when you've learned how to write a love letter to your fourth grade crush because that's all you knew at the point. But synaptic pruning is this idea, or is this process of like pruning back all of the unnecessary connections, like things that you don't use that much. It's your brain's way of saying, hey bro, you're getting kind of old here, and I don't want to work as hard now, so let's just work on a few things that you're kind of decent at. For me, synaptic pruning sort of like pruned back that part of my brain that had the desire to actually dive deeper into the visual arts. That got pruned back, and I was left at a cafeteria munching on a blueberry muffin when two of my other friends were indulging in the visual arts, appreciating Monet and Picasso when they were off on tangents. I was at the cafeteria munching on a blueberry muffin. I think the older I get, the more of a aura of this crazy uncle that you probably get to see once every fortnight, the more of that like persona that I started assuming. It's this uncle that had perhaps seen a little too much from life, that eventually he had just succumbed to part despair, part idiocy. When things get a little intellectual, my brain just sort of shuts off, right? And I started thinking about lunch when these people came out from the art gallery. I still had the muffin with me, and I was like, hey, there's this great Italian place uptown, and it turned out they were closed on Sundays. So I led these two friends of mine to a closed restaurant, and they were disappointed, allegedly, because it was a brilliant Italian restaurant. So this friend of mine, because the Italian restaurant is closed, she pulled out her phone and she looked up this Asian styled cuisine place called Chin Chin. And immediately, this other friend of mine, she is Japanese, she's not dead, she's still alive, she chuckled, and I asked her why, because I don't speak Japanese. She basically said, you know what Chin Chin means in Japanese, right? And I was like, what? And she said it meant penis, or it means penis, and in a very childish kind of way. So I started laughing, and the other friend of mine, she was kind of embarrassed, but we still decided that we were going to this penis restaurant. It's kind of like one of those tattoos that people get on their arms of characters that they just don't understand. And maybe when they come across a person that actually understands the language, understands the characters, it's just a trigger point for comedy. So nevertheless, we settled down. This artsy friend of mine, this artsy friend of mine, and this guy who took later training, who came a little later into the restaurant, they were like the philosophical types. They were the types that went on about like Peter Singer, or like they were talking about like some metaphysics ethics. But this Japanese friend and I were just kind of like, we're more down to earth, a little more down to earth. Even though I don't consider myself as totally down to earth, I'm still like very much in the clouds, but both of us were kind of down to earth. So we started talking, and I basically said to her that like, I'm at the point of my life where I've just kind of realized how basic I am. There's this idea when I was younger that I'm going to be someone different, be something different, extraordinary human being. But then again, a few years later, I just kind of realized, hey, I still eat 3 meals a day, or maybe 2 meals a day sometimes. I still drink the same cup of coffee, like many Melburnians. And I just basically said to her, there's no way that I can drive a cab for a living because I'm terrible at driving. There's no way I can do what you're doing. She's She's a pharmacy student. I don't understand chemistry. And I have no idea how mathematics work. Back when I was in the 4th grade, I was diagnosed unofficially, unmedically, unclinically, by my 4th grade math teachers. I was diagnosed with mathematical dyslexia, which is not an official disease. It doesn't exist in the DSM. It's not a psychological disorder. 6 could turn into 3 in the same line of calculation. A 4 could turn into a 7 for all that matters. So the unanimous response from my teachers was, how the hell did you get that answer when I turned a piece of work in? So over time, I just didn't turn my work in. Over time, I flunked all of my mathematics classes, and it was a miracle that I even managed to get into an engineering school. So right then and there, in my 4th grade mathematics teacher's office, when they had that unanimous agreement of like, how the hell did you get that answer? I've decided that I was going to hate mathematics for the rest of my life. This mathematical dyslexia carried me through much of my teenage years. But once you venture into adulthood, it becomes really annoying. Not just for taxes. Taxes are annoying in and of itself, but also for sending off packages. So in Australia, postcodes are pretty intuitive. It's a 4-digit code, for example. So the area where I live in starts with a 3. It's like 3435 or like 3155, 3143, or like any sorts of combinations like that. But in Canada, postcodes are, they're grouped in this really weird sort of like 2 lumps of combinations of letters and numbers. So my dyslexic brain was screaming, right? Mathematically, dyslexic brain was screaming. What if I filled in the wrong number? But the postage was absolutely bonkers during COVID. And it wasn't easy for me to keep track of the numbers. At some point, I had to double check the address. I had to double check the postcode 20 million times. And I got up to the counter and I said to the lady, can I check it one more time? The lady already had the package in the basket ready to mail. She was ready to mail it off to Canada. But I was like, can I please check it again? She's like, hey, you can't change anything now. You know that, right? But I was like, I still want to check it. She's like, you can't change anything. And I just kind of gave up and I left the post office. But the next 3 nights were some of the most difficult nights of my entire life because I kept thinking about, like, what if I filled a number in wrong? What if I accidentally mailed it off to someone in the middle of nowhere? Because Canada's a big place. If you get the postcode wrong, best case scenario, the address doesn't exist. Worst case scenario, some bearded guy is probably super confused about a mysterious package from Australia that had just turned up at his door. So that wasn't fun. If there's treatment for mathematical dyslexia, I would be like the first person on the waiting list to get that sorted. So we were at the restaurant. These 2 people, they were still going on about like ethics, Peter Singer, whatever they were talking about. But it was time for us to leave the restaurant because, COVID restrictions, you can't stay in one place for too long. So we left the restaurant and I caught a train back home. On the train, there were these kids in uniforms that were super loud. You can just feel the energy of the carriage change once one of these schoolboys or groups of schoolboys, once they rush into the carriage, the entire energy of the carriage changes. Here's something fascinating. 90% of the time, when people are loud on a train or in a carriage, they're actually not loud because they're loud. They're loud because they think, on some dimension or another, they think that everybody on a carriage is interested in what they were saying. For the record, as a grumpy guy sitting next to a window, I wasn't at all interested in their conversations. And then I sort of became aware of my grumpiness. I sort of became aware that it wasn't the case that they were loud. It was just the case that I was just getting grumpy and old. When you were younger, you looked at these grumpy people on the train and you thought to yourself, I'm never ever going to become one of them later in life. But what do you know? Later on in life, you're still turning to one of them. But right now, it's a slight annoyance. I don't know what it's going to turn into in 10 years when I turn 30. If you think young people are getting younger and more ridiculous around you, just kind of realize they're not getting any younger. They're just being who they are. It is you who's getting older. And it is you that's kind of being this, you're the weird one, essentially. And that's when I've realized I've passed through the rite of passage, and this is just the beginning.